out as an introduction to Conservative for a Reason, Series 1, Episode 2. I'm going to be talking about the First Amendment. I just need to make it abundantly clear that this is not intended to be exhaustive. The primary reason for this is to provide some background along the purpose of Series 1, which is to give you a little bit of a background on the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the thoughts of the Founding Fathers that cause me to believe what I believe. So it's only to make a couple of points so that we can have intelligent conversation moving on. And I'm going to say again, you're free to agree or disagree with me. We can talk about it. A lot of my friends and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of these things. And if you don't agree with me, by the way, you're in good company, because the Founding Fathers even had disagreements on some of these basics. If you're interested, study the history of the dynamics between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, who were tooth and nail, toe-to-toe quite often on some of these things. So intelligent conversation can be had, and I'm open for it. So this is why I believe what I believe, Episode 2 of this series. I'm Terry, and I'm conservative for a reason. This is the second video on the foundation of why I believe what I believe. And remember what we're doing here. I'm talking about not necessarily defending my position or trying to convince anybody else. I'm simply explaining to you why I believe what I believe. Most people know what I believe, but nobody knows why. So this is the second, and what we're going to do today is take a quick spin through the First Amendment to understand how to apply some of the principles from Series 1, Episode 1. That's the SO1, EO1 on the video title. So to do that, I'm not going to repeat a lot of what we talked about in number 1. I'm going to ask you to make sure that you have seen number 1. But here's the quick thumbnail review. We talked about the Declaration of Independence. We talked about how the Founding Fathers talked about laws of nature and of nature's God, that they were recognizing a higher authority, that they weren't the highest authority, that there was a higher, and that is God or nature, and that's where you hear about natural law as applies to just things that are because they are, and among those are certain unalienable rights, not inalienable. And remember, we talked about the difference being, if it's inalienable, you can yield that right. If it's unalienable, it just is, like the right to defend your life. And what we're going to eventually get into is the Second Amendment, but we have to get through this talk first. So we talked about the laws of nature and of nature's God. We talked about unalienable rights, and the Declaration says that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's a mouthful. They didn't define what they mean when they say among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because that wasn't the purpose of the Declaration of Independence. Remember, there are basically 3 documents. The Declaration of Independence gave us some principles but didn't elaborate on them, because the purpose of the Declaration was to explain why and to announce that we are separating from the Crown and becoming an independent nation. The Constitution, the second of those documents, describes our form of government, which we'll eventually talk about a lot too. The third of those is the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments in the Constitution. Remember that they were written by the same gang of guys. They had the same approach, but they have different purposes. The Bill of Rights begins to elaborate on those certain unalienable rights that are endowed upon us by nature and nature's God. The other key concept that we talked about was that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, not to grant these rights. Unalienable rights are not granted by government. They are secured by government. By secured, that means the government protects the rights that are given to us by nature and nature's God. Make no mistake, those rights can be taken away by a government in violation of the laws of nature and of nature's God, but government doesn't grant them, and the Founding Fathers recognize that government doesn't grant them. Okay, now with that, we're going to go on to a little bit about the First Amendment, and I'm going to grab my copy of the founding documents again, and I'm open to the Bill of Rights, I'm open to the amendments, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the First Amendment, but I can't really do that without talking about the Ninth and the 10th Amendment first for just a minute. They're very short, very simple. The Ninth Amendment says, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." So the Bill of Rights talks about certain rights. Amendment 9 says that there are others. These are the ones that are important to us today. Amendment 10, and you'll see why this is important in a few minutes, the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The purpose of the 10th Amendment was to limit the power and the authority of the federal government. The federal government said we are going to assume certain rights, certain authorities rather, and anything that we don't specifically call out in the Constitution belongs to the states or to the people. So, I'll explain that, and I'll come back to the 10th Amendment now and then. But now I'm going to go to the First Amendment, which is really misunderstood by a lot of people, and it's obvious by seeing the commentary on social media that people don't understand it. So the First Amendment reads like this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. That's it. That's the First Amendment. It's pretty simple, except how it's understood. This says that we have freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and we can, the press is free, and the right of the people can assemble and petition the government if they think the government's screwing up, and the government has to listen, okay? But here's where it's misunderstood. First, we're going to talk about the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This doesn't say, this doesn't say that you can't pray in a government building, you can't pray in school. This doesn't say that you can't have the 10 Commandments on the courthouse. This doesn't say that the government can't have any religion. What this says is that you are free to have whatever religion you want. So remember what the government is doing, securing your basic rights. How does the government secure your right to religion and the free exercise thereof? By staying out of it. And they promised, they gave their word, we're going to stay out of your religious life. They didn't say that the government couldn't exercise any form of religion or anything like that. This is a personal right that the government is securing for you by staying out of your life. have whatever kind of a religion you want, and the government will stay out of it. Same thing with the freedom of speech. You can say anything you want, and the federal government is not going to prosecute based on a law made by Congress. Does that mean you can say anything you want to at any time? It only means that the government is not going to prohibit you from saying certain things. And I see that every day on Facebook, on Twitter, people bashing the president, ripping the president up, bashing everything about him, from his personal life, his morals, his policies. If it wasn't for that, you could be arrested for that. And in many, many countries of the world, you would be in prison. You would lose your freedom immediately for saying some of the things about the government or the president or king or prime minister or whatever of other countries that is said about Trump. So does that mean you can say anything you want unconditionally? No. It only means that the federal government won't get involved. Can you yell fire in a crowded theater? Yep, you can. All you have to do is open your mouth and utter the word fire at a relatively loud volume. Can they arrest you for that? Can anybody arrest you for that? No. Is there going to be a consequence? Well, there very well could be a consequence. If there's a panic and a stampede and people are hurt, you're going to be the cause of it, and you will be blamed for it, and you will get criminally charged for it. Can you say anything you want to about the president without the government getting involved in arresting you? Yeah, you can. If, as we learned shortly after the inauguration of President Trump, if you threaten his life, if you make statements either with your words or with your art that indicate that you would threaten his life, if you have the power and the influence to carry it out, if you have any means, you're probably going to get investigated, because the single job of the Secret Service is to keep certain people alive, chief among them being the President of the United States. So, if you make a threatening statement towards the President of the United States, and it's always been this way ever since probably Lincoln was assassinated, the Secret Service just might show up at your house. They just might investigate you. They just might want to know, do you really have the disposition to do this? Do you really have the means to do this? If so, then you might have serious legal consequences. Maybe you really don't have the disposition to do it, but maybe those within your sphere of influence do. Then you might be arrested and tried for conspiracy, for trying to influence other people to take his life. Point is that the fact of saying words is not something the government wants to be involved in. It's the consequences that you might have based on what those words are. Okay? You also have the right to peaceably assemble and petition for a redress of grievances. That means you can get together, you can do some things that the Founding Fathers weren't able to do openly. You can sit on the courthouse lawn and talk about what's wrong with the government and what needs to be fixed. You can actually if you have the means to do it, raise a suit, go to court, and try and get a government position reversed. If you only have to turn on the news to see that happening, and you can do that. The Founding Fathers weren't able to. There are pubs. There are literally bars that were in existence at the time of the Revolution that are preserved just because the Founding Fathers used to sit in the back rooms by candlelight in the evening to talk about the problems with King George that had to be reversed, that were talked about in the second half of the Declaration of Independence, the 27 grievances that are listed there. They can do it openly. You can. You absolutely can. So the First Amendment is doing what? It's safeguarding certain unalienable rights. Securing those rights because the government is making a commitment to stay out of them. Look at some of the philosophy of the Founding Fathers, and you can find that very easily by reading the letters written by Madison, by Jefferson, by Hamilton, by reading some of the books that I've got on my shelves that were authored by some of those guys. The Federalist Papers is a great place to start. And I'll talk about, very briefly, because it's kind of a side note, the Federalist Papers. A lot of people don't know that Hamilton and Jefferson didn't get along very well. That's because Jefferson wanted a small government out of people's life. He wanted the federal government to have limited power, and just like is said in that 10th Amendment, any authority that the federal government doesn't specifically claim doesn't belong to them. That's why you see one of the debates today is on gun control that I'll be moving on to. That's why you see one state has a legal age for buying firearms and another state might have a different one. That's because the Constitution doesn't talk about that. So therefore, it is by default the right of the state to set that. Okay? So the First Amendment is beginning to guard those unalienable rights by promising to stay out of them. The Second Amendment is kind of a bridge amendment. It talks about the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The first thing listed there is life. It's protecting the Second Amendment partially protects your life by saying that you have every right in the world to defend it with whatever horsepower you need to defend your life. But it's going further than that. The Second Amendment bridges into what begins at the Third Amendment, addressing the grievances that they had with King George at the time of the Revolution. They couldn't have a list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence and then write a Bill of Rights and not say, but we're not going to do those things that King George did. So First Amendment, unalienable rights. Third through Eighth Amendment, addressing grievances that we are not going to commit. Ninth Amendment, there are others. These are the most important thing. If others come up and become issues, we'll address them. 10th Amendment, we're not going to go get power hungry and start grabbing power. If we don't take the authority in this document, it belongs to the state or the person. And that's a recognition of individual rights rather than collective rights, and we'll talk about that sometime too. So I'm intentionally making this video a little bit longer just to see if YouTube will let me. So I'm going to sign off now. I'm going to say to go ahead to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. If you're not following me on Facebook yet, go ahead. I've revived my original Twitter account. I'm not using it a lot yet, but once I start feeling like using it some, I'll put that on my Facebook page so that you can follow me on Twitter. just so that if you want these discussions, you can get these discussions. So that's all. I'm going to sign off now, and the next time you hear me, I will be joining the fray on our current national conversation after the Parkland, Florida school shootings and talking about the gun control debate. Thanks. I'll talk to you next time.